Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Vermont House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. It is Tuesday, May 5th, 2026 at 1:36 in the afternoon. So we are here. This is our first committee meeting of the day. And we are going to continue discussions on S71, which is an act relating to consumer data privacy and online surveillance. Over the weekend, we had asked our legislative counsel, Rick Sagal, to work on a document that would give us an idea of what we have in 2.3 of S71, what the Connecticut 2025 law says, what Maryland law is at the present, and also what California is. So it's giving us comparisons, those four comparisons. So Rick, I'll let you walk us through that document. Thank you for producing that for us.
Oh, you're very welcome. So Rick Sagal with the Office of Legislative Counsel. So, and thanks for setting that up. It makes my job a little easier. As far as why I'm doing this, the chair asked for a comparison document. So also want to specifically say that this is just for data minimization. This does not compare the thresholds, the exemptions, the definitions. There's a lot of variations between these, mostly laws, and then S71 bill. But for this chart, this document that's online, this is just the data minimization comparison between these four. The Connecticut comparison is their 2025 amendments, which take effect July 1, 2026. So just around the corner. They have not yet taken effect. I do want to note there are likely to be 2026 Connecticut changes, which are not included in this. They're not major amendments, but there are some Connecticut amendments. I believe it's going to the governor's desk. I don't know what the governor's going to do. So that's not here in this document. So if we're looking at S71 draft 2.3, we're looking at 2415 EA, which is the duties of controllers. I don't know, some of you know. If you want to look at the underlying bill, it is on page 33, page 33 on draft 2.3. So I have this chart kind of in categories of minimization. So the first chart here is limiting collection and processing of data, which in the Connecticut and Maryland laws are also the first item of the duties of controllers. And it is kind of a overall, I think.
Yeah.
That was,
You know, in speech class, they teach you to get like attention grabbing statement to get everyone's attention.
you should have been.
Yeah. Open the
Pay
window.
attention.
Open the window. Now that I have your attention.
Members of the bonds.
Yeah, that too.
Just and so everybody knows, so this document is on our webpage, so anybody can access it, as well as S71 2.3, and as well as the red line. It's still sitting on our page today. So thank you.
Yeah. So the top row is S71, and you can see this language. You've seen the language, how the draft 2.3 would handle kind of the overall, handling of collection and processing of data. So let's read that again. A controller shall limit the collection and processing of personal data to what is reasonably necessary and proportionate to provide or maintain a specific product or service requested by the consumer to whom the data pertains, and B, a communication that is not an advertisement by the controller to the consumer that is reasonably anticipated within the context of the relationship between the controller and the consumer. So there are some similarities between these other three states. I'll get to California in a sec. California is going to be different on almost all of these, and I'll explain why. So Connecticut, the language is similar. Limit the collection of personal data, not processing, just collection. Limit the collection of personal data to what is reasonably necessary and proportionate in relation to the purposes for which such data are processed as disclosed to the consumer. So, looking at this, the differences, maybe there are some important differences. It's similar between Connecticut 2025 and 2.3. B is not similar. B is unique to draft 2.3. No other state in this list has that specific language. It may be inferred in California, but let's get to that here in a second. B, Connecticut 2025. So B is the new language that Connecticut added in 2025 that kind of explains A to some extent. So B, a controller shall, unless the controller obtains the consumer's consent, not process the consumer's personal data for any material new purpose that is neither reasonably necessary to nor compatible with the purposes that were disclosed by the consumer pursuant to A, taking into account 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 things to take into account. 1, the consumer's reasonable expectation regarding such personal data at the time such personal data were collected based on the purposes that were disclosed to the consumer pursuant to A. So this is helping explain what a consumer deems to be reasonable as far as their expectations. 2, the relationship that such new purpose bears to the purposes that were disclosed to the consumer pursuant to A. The impact, 3, the impact that processing such personal data for such new purpose might have on the consumer. 4, the relationship between the consumer and the controller and the context in which the personal data were collected. And 5, the existence of additional safeguards, including, but not limited to, encryption or boy, that's a different way of wording. Pseudonymization in processing such personal data for such new purpose. So the businesses that are controllers in Connecticut must take into account those 5 things when processing personal data, unless they get the consent of the consumer. So if they get consent of the consumer, those 5 things you don't have to take those into account. And I assume that would be done by, and consent is defined in Connecticut a certain way, having the consumer read what they're going to do with the data and opting into that sharing of their processing personal data. So in terms of, so actually, this is a good question because I have Connecticut pulled up and I want to show you all how they define consent. May not be in this one. I may have to come back to you on that.
I suppose not a term. I said
You
term.
read this weekend?
I got it. You know the date. That's right.
Here it is. Okay. So this is Connecticut. This is 2020, no changes in 2025. So they left it as is. So meaning that they get a consumer's consent, right? Consent means a clear affirmative act signifying a consumer's freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous agreement. By the way, this matches Vermont 2.3. To the consumer, consent may include a written statement, including by electronic means, or any other unambiguous affirmative action. Consent does not include A, acceptance of general or broad terms of use, or a similar document that contains descriptions of personal data processing along with other unrelated information. So my answer to you, Rabudin, is no. Like it can't just be terms of agreement. It's got to be more specific than that. B, hovering over, muting, pausing, or closing a given piece of content, or C, agreement obtained through the use of dark patterns.
Can I ask a question, Rick, on that? Yeah, we're back there.
Yep.
So in B there, Connecticut stuff,
Mhm.
and I think I grasped all of that until we get to the 3rd line after subparagraph A of this subdivision.
Mhm.
And then it goes on taking into account, 1 through 5.
Mhm.
I don't understand. So what's the structure what's the purpose of that modifier? It's a list of modifiers, it seems,
Mhm.
around the controller obtaining consent? Or what's it modifying?
So I think so 1A is a strict limitation, right? That you cannot do this.
As to,
It must be necessary and proportionate, right? So B
Yeah.
is saying, unless you get consent, you shall not, and maybe remove that part, right? So just say controller shall not process
Right.
the consumer's personal data for any material new purpose that is neither reasonably, and I think that, so new purpose is important there. Neither reasonably necessary to nor compatible with the purposes that were disclosed in A.
Right.
So 1A, a company disclosed to a consumer, we're going to use your data for this reason, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
and you,
as long as it's reasonably necessary and proportionate, right?
correct,
Can I give an example?
sure,
So I read this from the California regulations, a flashlight app you get on your phone, right? It's an app that you use to, it's a flashlight, right? The consumer would not expect that app to track their geolocation. It's just a flashlight, right? So the app, when you download it, when you activate it, it may say we use your data for these reasons. Geolocation would not be reasonably necessary and proportionate, right? To that use of that app.
right,
Now, B, let's say that you have the app on your device, and let's say the controller, the app publisher wants to change their terms. And now they do want your geolocation data.
right.
Would B allow that? I still say no because it still fails A, right?
Well, I thought B said you gotta obtain the consent for this new purpose.
Right.
So
What does 1 through 5 add to that concept?
I think let's see because California has a similar, and they give examples, and I stole that example from California. I think that's going to help understand the difference between A and B.
That's right.
That's a good question. It is a good question. I think it's new language that Connecticut has added, and no other state except California has in their regulations. So I think we should look at California too to see how they worded it.
Okay.
Yep. It's a very fair question. Shall we go to Maryland before California?
No, I'll do it after you just California.
So Maryland, again, they're 1I in this case. A control shall limit the collection of personal data to what is reasonably necessary and proportionate to provide or maintain a specific product or service requested by the consumer to whom the data pertains. They're kind of a variation of Maryland, Connecticut, and Draft 2.3.
Yep.
But then they have later on in their bill, a controller may not, unless the controller obtains the consumer's consent, process personal data for a purpose that is neither reasonably necessary to nor compatible with the disclosed purposes for which the personal data is processed as disclosed. So that's kind of what Connecticut has, but without the 1 through 5, right? Maryland says you can't do this without consent. Connecticut says yes, but also here's what you should take into account for this personal data processing. Okay, California in their statute is a business's collection, use, retention, and sharing of the consumer's personal information shall be reasonably necessary and proportionate to achieve the purposes for which the personal information was collected or processed, or for another disclosed purpose that is compatible with the context in which the personal information was collected and not further processed in a manner that is incompatible with those purposes. California is different as far as how it's structured. I can't tell you exactly in practice how different these are. But importantly, in California, they have regulations that really expand on this. I think it's important to look at those because this is really where the enforcement's going to be. So I'm looking at, I can share this with Jonathan. This is the California CPPA regulations. It's 127 pages. We call it rulemaking. So this is California rules when it comes to just their Data Privacy Act. So looking at the bottom of page, I'm on page 12 of 127. 7002 is the section number. The purposes for which the personal information was collected or processed shall be consistent with the reasonable expectations of the consumers whose personal information is collected or processed. The consumer's reasonable expectations concerning the purpose for which the personal information will be collected or processed shall be based on the following. The relationship between the consumer and the business. For example, if the consumer, and this is what's helpful, I think in California, they give you examples. If the consumer is intentionally interacting with the business on its website to purchase a good or service, the consumer likely expects that purpose for collection or processing is to provide the good or service. By contrast, the consumer of a business's mobile flashlight application would not expect the business to collect their geolocation information to provide that service. So if you look at this, this right here, right? This is the key. And if you go back to Connecticut has pieces of California's regulations in statute. So here, Connecticut actually has the relationship that such new purpose bears to the purposes that were disclosed to the consumer pursuant to A, right?
No, oh, can you go back to Connecticut? Oh, sorry.
The chart.
Yeah,
Okay.
so is that language what S71 was built off
Which version S71 has passed by the Senate?
as passed by this?
So S71 as passed by the Senate was based off Connecticut's original Data Privacy Act, which does not include B. Yeah.
So Connecticut has a consumer consent permission. You consent and you can do these things.
Yeah.
California does not, right?
California's is different. I mean, there is the baseline data minimization here in
Yeah.
C that you see. It shall be reasonably necessary and proportionate. So that's kind of in line with these other three, sorry. But then they go on, they don't have prohibitions against sensitive data. That's where it's different. California does not inherently prohibit the sale of sensitive data. It gives consumers the right upfront to opt in or out of that information.
Sensitive, but
Yes.
not of a person, how about just generally?
This that you look at, I think C is a pretty structural protection for consumers in California.
Oh, so C is a consent provision?
Yeah. Well, C is their data minimization kind of structural foundation, right? That a use, retention, sharing of consumers' personal information shall be reasonably necessary and proportionate to achieve the purposes for which it was collected.
I'm sorry, I'm being tense. So in California, is there either an opt-in or opt-out provision?
It's all opt out. As far as the sensitive data, I think minor data is protected differently, but sensitive data, targeted advertising, that's all opt out.
Okay,
But it's so different because it's like a very strict notice that they must provide consumers.
okay. Thanks.
Rick, can you go up to Connecticut and highlight I through V?
If my lap, okay.
Thank you. So I had many hours of calls this weekend with Maroney, who crafted Connecticut, both the original and Connecticut 2025, as well as the compliance lawyers who provided technical assistance to get him the language of which he based these updates off of, as well as the California team to better understand the regulations piece. So what happens, both politically and policy-wise, so the committee knows, is for Connecticut and their 2025 updates, Maroney's goal and intent was to try to create a new data minimization standard that would be based off of California's data minimization. The problem with that, as Rick has illustrated, is that California not only has regulations which have updated things, but also have rulemaking that just continues to create a list. And so at the moment in time in 2025, what he was trying to do is try to take those 125 regulations or whatever, and then take the data minimization pieces of that and craft something that could get as close as he could to creating a brand new standard for states that would emulate the levels of protection that California offers in its data minimization standards. the problem that happened is that and why some people have heard me say that he broke his standard of what was intended by the people who, like I said, both with talking with him and the people who were providing technical assistance, is if you look at the highlighted list, California essentially attaches I through V, the 1, 2, 3, 2, 4, 5, to both A and B. Maroney attached it only, says the subparagraph A. He attached it to A. It's supposed to be attached to both A and B. And that's essentially what the California regulations do, is attach both the collection and like use under a disclosed purpose, but also if someone gives consent. So the idea being that like if someone's consenting, they have this list of like standards. It's not a free for all, but also if somebody has a privacy policy where they disclose a bunch of shit, that also shouldn't be a free for all. That should also have rules under it. So that's what California continues to do all the time. A state like Connecticut that might not have the ability to keep updating their stuff. That's what he was trying to do for that moment in time. And yeah, so yeah, just want to.
Can I zero in on that, maybe put a 5 point?
Yeah.
I think what I'm hearing saying is that Connecticut, somewhere else maybe in the statutes, and California somewhere in there has a consent, both initially.
Connecticut is right there. So the disclosed purposes is A, the consent one is B. And then those rules are supposed to kind of I'm calling them rules, but like 1 through 5 is essentially, those are kind of like clarifiers that are supposed to attach to both A and B in this.
That's what I meant.
Yeah. Okay.
So in terms, so you can opt, you got this data minimization standard, but you can still opt out both for the initial collection and for a new purpose under Connecticut and California.
I think you lost me on that one.
I think I got it.
Okay.
I looked at his words.
Yeah.
So I think the proposal from Rep. Priestley is that the highlighted section would be like so 1A, 1B, 1C, and you would say in the subdivision, reasonably necessary and proportionate shall take into account 1 through 5.
Yeah, exactly.
And that way you have a 1A, which limits the collection. 1B, if you have, unless you get consent, you cannot do any new purpose processing. And then C explains how businesses can comply and ensure what is reasonably necessary and proportionate. That to me, I don't know if this is broken, but if I think it makes it more clear. I'll say that without thinking too much about it yet, but that is my first take. Sorry.
I'm sorry, but I'm just zeroing in on the consent issue.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing is that consumer consent would apply to both A and B in Connecticut under the 26th Amendment.
Consent isn't necessarily a thing that interplays with A. It's disclosed
It's not.
purposes. Yeah. So it's like it's just put in the privacy
So it's
policy.
disclosed, but the consumer can't do anything.
Not necessarily. Yeah, not necessarily. And B is specifically when
Okay.
consent is given.
There we go.
Yeah.
So it's any new purpose. Any new purpose that the
The new
controller-
purpose it can be
Yes.
consented to,
Yes,
but not the original collection.
correct.
If I could just additionally kind of expand on the thing that this represents. So politically, we are often told we can't veer from what other states have done. We need to copy Connecticut. Connecticut 2025 illustrates veering from what other states have done to try to create something that is closer to California. And so I just want to kind of make that point, that we are told we can't innovate and come up with things that are protective of the consumers, veering away from what other states have done. Connecticut is demonstrating that they did that in 2025. They are attempting to try to, again, he kind of screwed up his references, but his intent was to get closer to where California is.
If the committee wants in the next draft, I can take a stab at that and you can decide which one. to do.
I get it.
Up to you all.
That was very helpful.
Okay, so can I go back to California? All right, so this is California's rulemaking regulations, they call it over there. So one, we talked about the relationship between the consumer and the business. Two, the type, nature, and amount of personal information that the business plans to collect or process. For example, if a business's mobile communication application requests access to the consumer's contact list in order to call a specific individual, the consumer who's providing their contact list likely expects that the purpose of the business's use will be to connect the consumer with the specific contact they select. Similarly, if a business collects the consumer's fingerprint in connection with setting up the security feature of unlocking the device using the fingerprint, the consumer likely expects that the business's use of the consumer's fingerprint is only for the purpose of unlocking their mobile device. So let's Connecticut, the use, nature, amount. I don't see that one. Yeah, I don't know if that one is in Connecticut's statute, this specific, and maybe they didn't include it for a reason, but that is unique to California so far, from what I can tell. Three, the source of the personal information and the business model method for collecting or processing. For example, if the consumer is providing their personal information directly to the business while using their product or service, the consumer likely expects the business will use that information to provide that service or product. However, the consumer may not expect that the business will use that same information for a different product or service offered by the business or their subsidiary. So I think, are we looking at maybe not word for word, but it's California. You can pick and choose what you want if you want to include any of it. Four, the specificity, explicitness, prominence, and clarity of disclosures to the consumers about the purpose for collecting or processing their personal information, such as in the notice at collection and in the marketing materials to the consumers about the business's good or service. For example, the consumer who receives a pop-up notice that the business wants to collect their phone number to verify their identity when they log in likely expects that the business will use their phone number for the purpose of verifying their identity and not for marketing. Similarly, the consumer may expect that a mobile app that markets itself as a service that finds gas prices near the consumer's location will collect and use the consumer's geolocation information for that specific purpose when they are using the service. Specificity, closeness, prominence. Again, maybe not word for word in Connecticut. Five, the degree to which the involvement of service providers, contractors, third parties, or other entities in the collecting or processing of personal information is apparent to the consumers. For example, the consumer likely expects an online retailer's disclosure of the consumer's name and address to a delivery service provider in order to for that service provider to deliver a product because that service provider's involvement is apparent to the consumer. By contrast, the consumer may not expect the disclosure of personal information to a service provider if the consumer is not directly interacting with the service provider or the service provider's role in the processing is not apparent to the consumer. So I don't know if I need to read all these, but you can see California's method is not to put in a statute, but to let the Consumer Privacy Protection Agency, I think, develop those rules and then.
Yeah, so all of these regulations, they're further clarifying and requiring, or they're clarifying what the controller's use of personal data is.
So far,
But it doesn't.
it goes
talk
on.
about consent.
Well, it does eventually, but not in this section.
Okay.
Yes. So on this document, I have linked that section that's in the regulations that deal with this kind of foundational data minimization. Are there any questions about that? Continue. Let me also skip ahead real quick to show you all. If you go down to the kind of the middle of the PDF, I have a side-by-side, which is a little difficult, but did my best to kind of show you how in the actual bills, the language and where it is in each bill. So you have
Oh, yeah.
S71, 1A and 1B, talked about that, and Connecticut's also is 1A, 1B. Maryland's is a little bit different, and then you have California's statutory, no regulation language, or just statutory. So you can follow along with that if you want instead. Okay, the second piece of data minimization is first party and targeted advertising. So I'm going in the order of S71 draft 2.3, which doesn't always, it's not important. It's not necessarily any reason for that. It's just that's the order in S71. So subdivision 7 in the duties of controllers a controller shall not process the personal data of a consumer for the purposes of targeted advertising or sell the consumer's personal data if the controller knew or willfully disregards that the consumer is a minor. So that's specific to minors. And the other two states that have this is also specific to minors. However, draft 2.3 also has number 2. A controller may process or transfer the personal data of a consumer collected to 1, which is what we just talked about earlier, the shall limit what is reasonably necessary, to provide first-party advertising or targeted advertising to the consumer unless the personal data is sensitive data, the consumer has opted out of targeted advertising, or the controller knew or willfully disregards that the consumer is a minor. Connecticut 2025, a controller shall not process the personal data of a consumer for purposes of target advertising or sell the consumer's personal data under circumstances where controller has actual knowledge or willfully disregards that consumer is at least 13 but younger than 18. Maryland, a controller may not process the personal data of a consumer for the purposes of target advertising if the controller knew or should have known that the consumer is under 18. So the draft 2.3 again has kind of more language specific to advertising that these other 3 states, and California's is not as clear as far as, you know, a limitation. It's all in the consent piece that consumers are allowed to opt out. It's just a different structure, and it's hard to compare.
So let me play that back to you. So this is all dealing basically with minors. Right?
Except for number 2 in draft 2.3.
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
Well, except 2.37 talks about minors.
Right.
Number 2 is not.
So the subdivision 2 beneath number 7
Oh, okay.
is yeah.
Or,
is
I
unique.
see, or, okay,
Yep.
or is a minor. So for Connecticut and Maryland, those are sort of exceptions to the ability of the consumer to opt in or out.
Right. Yeah, there's no opting into for a
Minor,
minor for minors. Yep.
And everything else in Connecticut and Maryland.
Yeah.
You can't.
Right. And so with draft 2.3, you said you can't, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
right.
yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And again, I did this over the weekend. California regs may have,
It's great.
there's 127 pages, so I
It is.
didn't have the entire time to figure out what California could do. But again, it's going to be an opt-in, opt-out situation.
Just add the lack of opt out on the minor pieces that a minor generally was that a minor can't. Sonic, yeah, totally. It was something he struggled with in Connecticut.
Data security, these are mostly the same in all 4. Draft 2.3, a controller shall establish, implement, and maintain reasonable administrative, technical, and physical data security practices to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility of personal data appropriate to the volume and nature of the data at issue, including disposing of personal data in accordance with a retention schedule that requires deletion of personal data when the data is required to be deleted by law or is no longer necessary for the purpose for which the data was collected or processed. Connecticut implement a controller shall establish, implement, and maintain reasonable administrative, technical, and physical data security practices to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility of personal data appropriate to the volume and nature of the personal data at issue. Maryland, establish, implement, maintain. It is word for word, Connecticut. I'm looking at the two. California, a business that collects a consumer's personal information shall implement reasonable security procedures and practices appropriate to the nature of the personal information to protect the personal information from unauthorized or illegal access, destruction, use, modification, or disclosure. So draft 2.3 includes, including this text appears to be this here is not word for word that I could find in the other two. 3. Okay, processing and selling sensitive data. Two different things. Okay, processing sensitive data is one thing, collecting is one thing, selling it's a separate thing, but they are combined in some of these states. So I put them in the same chart. So draft 2.3 shall not collect or process sensitive data concerning a consumer, except when the processing is strictly necessary to provide or maintain a specific product or service requested by the consumer to whom the sensitive data pertains. And then there's a just ban on the sale of sensitive data in draft 2.3. Connecticut shall not process sensitive data concerning a consumer unless it is reasonably necessary in relation to the purposes for which such sensitive data are processed and without obtaining the consumer's consent, or if it's a child, without processing in accordance with COPA. H is a opt-in. So the consumer can opt in to the sale of sensitive data. Maryland, a controller may not, except where the collection or processing is strictly necessary to provide or maintain a specific product or service requested by the consumer to whom it pertains, collect, process, or share sensitive data concerning a consumer. And Maryland also has a ban on the sale of sensitive data. California is, I put it here because I think it's important, but again, it's different. A consumer shall have the right at any time to direct a business that collects sensitive personal information by the consumer to limit its use of that information to which is necessary to perform the services or provide the goods reasonably expected by an average consumer. A business that uses or discloses a consumer's sensitive personal information for purposes other than those specified shall provide notice to consumers that it may be used, disclosed to a service provider or contractor for additional purposes, and that consumers have the right to limit the use or disclosure. So it's not a ban, it is a opt-in, opt-out, excuse me, opt-out in California, which again, their model is totally different. So the consumer is going to get a kind of initial request as to how their information should be handled, and the consumer makes those decisions based on that initial opt-out.
Yeah, so just replaying. So Connecticut has an opt-in for sensitive data.
Yep.
California allows an opt-out, permits an opt-out, and 2.3 in Maryland say you just can't.
Right.
Or you can't sell.
Can't sell.
Or process.
Yeah, can't sell. Processing is allowed in both, but they're actually pretty similar that it must be strictly necessary to provide or maintain a specific product or service.
Yeah, but yeah, okay.
it's not even consent, it's just, it's up to the controller to make that determination. Is this a reasonable, in relation to what they want? Is this processing of their data, sensitive data needed for this specific product or service?
Should I assume that when it says Connecticut 2025, it's not what was passed by the Senate, correct?
Right.
And I haven't gone through, but is there any data minimization that was passed? Or is this only stuff that came out after the Senate version?
You know what, actually, I'm gonna share this with Jonathan as well. So if you go to Connecticut's bill from last year, it's a markup. So you underline like our style, underline means it's new. I think brackets means it's removed, which is different than what we do. So if you go to page. There we go. All right, page 37. This is their duties of controllers, and you can see that their A1 is different, has been changed. And then you see all this that Brett previously talked about, adding the California regulations as best they tried to do that. Their data security didn't change. Sensitive data did change. So you can see here. Previously does not process sensitive data concerning the consumer without obtaining the consumer's consent. Or if it's a child, without processing in with COPA. So they added some protections as for sensitive data. It's now that reasonably necessary in relation to the purpose. So yes, you can see what some of it is only 2025, but some of it's also brought over from their initial bill. Okay, discrimination. Draft 2.3, a controller shall not collect or process personal data in violation of the laws of the state and federal laws that prohibit unlawful discrimination. And also subdivision 9 touches on discrimination. Shall not discriminate against a consumer for exercising any of their rights contained in the subchapter, including denying goods or services, charging different prices or rates for goods or services, or providing a different level of quality of goods or services. Connecticut, not process personal data in violation of any law of the state that prohibits unlawful discrimination against consumers. And any evidence, lack of evidence concerning proactive anti-bias testing or any similar proactive effort to avoid processing such data in violation of such law. They love the word such in Connecticut. It's such a pain. Yeah, it's actually, they overuse it. Including but not limited to any evidence or lack of evidence concerning the quality, efficacy, recency, and scope of any such testing or effort, the results of such testing or effort, and the response to the results of such testing or effort shall be relevant to any claim available for a violation of such law and any defense available thereto. And then they separate out the federal law, which 2.3 combines. Not process personal data in violation of any federal law that prohibits unlawful discrimination against consumers. Maryland 3 is the same as 5. Basically, actually, it's process and not collect or process, just process. 6, discriminate against a consumer for exercising a consumer right contained in the subtitle, and then including denying goods or services, charging different prices or rates, similar to draft 2.3. And then unique to Maryland, collect, process, or transfer personal data or publicly available data in a manner that unlawfully discriminates and or otherwise unlawfully makes available the equal enjoyment of goods by various protected classes. Again, unique to Maryland. California, a business shall not discriminate against a consumer because they exercised any of their rights by denying goods or services, charging different prices, providing different level of quality of goods, suggesting the consumer will receive a different price, or retaliation against an employee because of exercising their rights. So not huge differences there between the states. Revoking consent. Draft 2.3 a controller shall provide an effective mechanism for a consumer to revoke their consent that is at least as easy as the mechanism by which they provided the consent. And upon revocation of the consent, cease to process the data as soon as practicable, but not later than 15 days after receipt. Connecticut provide an effective mechanism for a consumer to revoke consent that is at least as easy by which they provided the consent. And upon such revocation, it's 15 days as well. Very similar. Maryland, a controller shall provide an effective mechanism for a consumer to revoke their consent that is at least as easy as by which it was provided. There's no time there. California, the consent webpage also allows the consumer or a person authorized by the consumer to revoke the consent as easily as it is affirmatively provided.
That was an easy section.
Right. I think there's
It
maybe
was.
a path forward on consent, voting consent. Okay, selling, processing minors' data. So some of these came from the earlier targeted advertising. I brought it back over if it applied. So draft 2.3, a controller shall not process the personal data of a consumer for the purposes of targeted advertising or sell the consumer's personal data if the controller knew or willfully disregards the consumer is a minor. Connecticut, not process sensitive data concerning the consumer unless it is reasonably necessary in relation to the purposes for which the data are processed and without obtaining their consent. Or in the case of a child, processing in accordance with COPA. Shall not process the personal data of a consumer for purposes of target advertising, this is still Connecticut, or sell the consumer's personal data under circumstances where a controller has actual knowledge or willfully disregards the consumer is at least 13, but younger than 18. In Maryland, a controller may not process the personal data of a consumer for the purposes of targeted advertising if they knew or should have known that the consumer is under 18. May not sell the personal data of a consumer if the controller knew or should have known that the consumer is under the age of 18. California, a business shall not sell or share the personal information of a consumer if the business has actual knowledge that the consumer is less than 16, unless, in the case of consumers at least 13 and less than 16, or if the consumer's parent or guardian, or in the case of consumers who are less than 13, has affirmatively authorized the sale or sharing of the consumer's personal information. A business that willfully disregards the consumer's age shall be deemed to have had actual knowledge of the consumer's age.
What's the distinction between the knew or should have known that the consumer is under 18 years of age and has actual knowledge that the consumer is less than 16 years? What are the standards?
Yeah. So, actual knowledge is having the awareness that this consumer is under 18, either by ID verification. They attest when they registered, they put their birth date. That makes them under 18, right? That would be actual knowledge. Knew or should have known includes knowledge, actual knowledge, but also includes where there are signs that you should have realized this person was a minor. It wouldn't be their birthday necessarily. That would be actual knowledge, but it would be other information inferred about that consumer that would lead a reasonable business to know this person is a minor. So it's kind of a I say subjective, but it's going to be would a reasonable business who's doing reasonable work and due diligence understand that this consumer is a minor. I wish I could define it better, but it's a legal term that is up to a judge or jury to determine should you have known.
Follow up, if I may, if the known or should have known, is that just based on data that is exchanged by that
Could be.
customer and or could that be coming from some other source, right, later on?
It depends, the business would have to show in discovery what information they had about this consumer, right? Or probably a lot of consumers, right? That if the company, for some reason, is charged with violating a data privacy law because this bucket of consumers, you should have known these were minors, right? Because of XYZ. And that could be data analysis, it could be traffic analysis on your website, it could be patterns on your website. There's things that businesses have used to track their visitors. In addition to actually asking for a date of birth, right? That's one easy way that a business could verify that someone is over a certain age, but it's tricky when they are not in person, right? These are virtual visits. So, but there are tools businesses have that help them understand that.
I would think the data minimization standard should further complicate that because now you need to have a reason to ask for the date of birth.
All right, I'm about to show you kids code, which may be helpful actually for this, because that's a law that you all passed last year, takes effect in January. So I actually have that just for this one because it involves minors. So one thing to keep in mind here is that a covered business is not the same as a controlled, right? A covered business in kids code is a business that meets certain standards. They have to make a majority of their revenue from online sales. It's not going to be a business with a storefront, right? It's likely going to be an online website or app. So let me read what the Age Appropriate Design Code says about data privacy when it comes to minors. A covered business shall not, one, collect, share, retain any personal data of a covered minor that is not necessary to provide an online service, product, or feature with which the covered minor is actively and knowingly engaged. Two, use previously collected personal data of a covered minor for any purpose other than a purpose for which the personal data was collected, unless necessary to comply with any obligation under this chapter. So you probably want to be careful when you are regulating minors in this bill that you're not conflicting with the kids code law. And you'll have to determine what you want the policy to be, right? Whatever that turns out to be, if you want to, currently it is shall not process the personal data of the consumer or for targeted advertising or sell their data if the controller knew or willfully disregards that the consumer is a minor.
Just want to add the definition for kids code as actual knowledge. When you look at covered minor.
Who a covered minor is, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, that's implied?
No, it's in statute. It's in
Different section.
it's different section. Yeah.
But the AG is given
I
rulemaking.
was wondering if they had strict liability.
Right. The AG is given rulemaking.
That's reliable. But the AG is given rulemaking to help businesses determine age, because it is complicated. Like that is something that is an issue, is determining how old a visitor or consumer is when you can't see them. Okay, so that's for the major data minimization pieces. That's the comparison between Vermont 71 2.3 and those other three states. And then you have the side by side, which I already went over these, but it might be helpful to see this in a different way. Same information, just displayed in a table. That is, I try to line it up, not always exactly perfect. Oh, sure. But you can see here, like the sensitive data piece, it's different in all of the states. It's 8 and 2.3 H in Connecticut, 2 in Maryland, and then C in California.
Just question, right? Every time we see consent in Connecticut, it's that express consent, right? That's what we talked about at the beginning.
It's not express consent, it's unambiguous, because
Unambiguous.
yeah, express consent and genetic data privacy is very, restricted, right? It must be, I can pull that bill up if you want to look at it, but I'll go back up.
Unambiguous consent.
Yeah.
So it's a relatively high level. It's not a buried in their policy level, right?
I mean, that's probably more, that maybe not something I can answer, but to me, this definition is more than just a terms of service that you would just click a box, you know, this is, and if you want, actually, if you go to a website that has California's practices in place, you'll see, a lot of websites do.
Not California.
Well, no, actually, I'm talking about California too, as far as their consent piece. Connecticut hasn't taken effect yet, so they may not be complying, right? Places in Connecticut, but I think one way to see how this looks is a website that is in compliance with California, and you'll see like a very clear in that case, opt out notice to consumers of all their rights that they have. Not every website does it the same, but I think it's very clear that it can't just be a checkbox and you're done. It's got to be more than that.
And there's some stuff you can, I've seen this in other things. I mean, you can, instead of a checkbox, you can say, well, you have to type, I agree, or you have to type, yes, all caps or something like that. Something to get the consumer out of that. Just get me through this mode,
Yeah, my question is around the law and how it's written and what it requires, right? So if the law requires that or not is my question.
I think it needs to be something. So I look at what consent does not include: an acceptance of general broad terms of use or a similar document that contains descriptions of personal data along with other unrelated. So it can't just be like a general privacy notice and terms of use. It's going to have to be something specific to how we handle your data. And it still may be hard to read. Like it still may be something that a consumer is going to just like, I don't care, right? Like I don't want to read this. This is fine. I don't care what to do with my data. But it does need to be something that looks different than your normal terms of use that people sign.
Would it, when we look at the list, when I'm looking at Connecticut. So the specifics of consent. So would it be, you check a box if I'm allowing you to use sell my personal data? Or would it be everything in one checkbox?
Good question. I may defer to other witnesses who can tell you how that looks in the field, but I think the law as 2.3 is structured, obviously you can't sell sensitive data, right? Under 2.3. So if you were to go with the Connecticut option, which you could with consent, could that be lumped in with other targeted advertising? I think that may not be the best example. This 2.3 has regulations on targeted advertising. I think it's unclear. And I think what you want needs to be clear. Like if you want these things to be structured a certain way, it should be in the bill that you want this to be XYZ, right?
Yeah, just following up on that, I came in thinking, well, there's two types of consent. You can opt out, you disclose and you opt out. I guess that's consent, some implied consent, I guess. But then you have, well, express consent is where you actually affirmatively opt in, like we did with the genetic testing.
Yeah.
I guess I'm coming to the conclusion that there are nuances and, grays, between the two poles, just based on some of the material that you put up there. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, just for fun, if you want, this is 639, the genetic data privacy. So this is
Express.
Yeah, consumers affirmative authorization to grant permission in response to a clear, meaningful, prominent notice regarding the collection, use, maintenance, or disclosure of genetic data for a specific purpose. Express consent cannot be inferred from an action. Agreement through the use of dark patterns does not constitute. That's actually pretty similar.
But it's not opt out. In other words,
What am I doing?
you can't just get a disclosure
And if you don't do anything, they can do that. They can pass under the genetic data.
Right, that
And I
is,
think
that is
under-
an- that is an opt-in, right?
Maybe under some of these other states, I can't figure out which.
See, actually, I'm looking at Connecticut here, and then there's not a whole lot of difference between the two.
Okay, yeah, that's what confused me, the genetic. Because it's clear affirmative act
Yeah.
as opposed to implying after you disclose.
So this would be just putting it out there, the kind of thing that to make it align with Vermont law, we would call it express consent, even if Connecticut doesn't, so that it aligns with a different law,
Something else.
even if it's so, right, like, so we're looking at, you know, if we want to adopt something that's very close to Connecticut, we might call consent express consent because it lines up with genetic data privacy, even though the definition is the same between the two states. I call it something else, so, right, like that's logical.
Right.
Just confirming my thought process.
Well, I think I've reached one more thing I want to show you all. At the bottom of this chart are the limitations. They're pretty similar. So this is at least in draft 2.3, Connecticut and Maryland. These follow the data minimization subdivisions. So this is talking about how it should not be construed to require a controller to provide a product or service that requires the personal data of a consumer that the controller does not collect or maintain. And then Connecticut adds in, this 1 and 2 are combined into 2 in Connecticut. Same thing with Maryland. So just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. This here. Maryland has that. So at the end of the limitations, a controller should not be construed to prohibit a controller from, et cetera, provided that the selling of the personal data is not a condition of participation in the program. I believe that is just Maryland has that, but not Connecticut. So that's my little comparison. Just of the data minimization pieces.
So, I'm gonna get this straight. And S-71 as passed by the Senate was based on what version of the Connecticut law?
As they originally passed it, 2020, 2022?
But not 25.
Right, correct.
Connecticut 2025 takes effect in July.
Right.
Is Attorney General then looking at how they would apply the consent? Consumers' consent?
I don't know.
So it's,
Yeah,
they say,
you can ask.
no, you can't lump everything together, you have to provide thoughts for each different.
I'm talking with him at 4.
Did I mention in Connecticut, there is a 2026 bill that makes some changes, but not to that piece about the 1 through 5.
Yeah, no, I didn't.
That's not been amended yet, so. It's also not taking effect, so maybe I'm waiting for.
No, it hasn't been signed. It's, yeah.
I mean, the 2025, maybe they'll fix after that, but, the 2026 changes are not gonna be, if it passes, will not be as substantial as the 2025 changes.
we can make sure that don't mind giving consent. In Connecticut, I'm fine with that. Want to make sure that we're not lumping everything together. That we just check one box and means that you can now sell sensitive data.
I mean, I would like to go personally. I'm just as far when it comes to the sale of sensitive data, I feel like that's one of the riskiest things that are out there, especially with the consent piece. And multiple states this year have passed, including Connecticut, passed in the very Maryland did the ban on the sale of sensitive data hard stop, as Rick showed, but other states have also been moving towards that, but more specifically a straight up ban, including Connecticut, on the sale of precise geolocation data in particular too for stalking and
I heard what you're saying, you were talking about, it can't be just one box, right?
Even if it's separate from regular, disclosures that a company provides, it should be something that's separate. And then,
Correct.
in my mind, then we're not gonna lump all of those separate,
Correct.
the separate consents that are in there into one box either.
Right, but once you start that kind of construct and you sort of itemize, I guess, the different activities that you're consenting to, then it's looking kind of like an opt-in with, you have a list and the control can do all these things if the consumer says, yeah, you can do that specific activity, which sounds a lot like, what we did with genetic data. And I'm also wondering, I'm particularly concerned about sensitive data. And maybe we'll get into a general discussion, but I could see a distinction between how strict you want that consent to be expressly stated, and maybe a different standard for data that we think is really important versus other data that's important, but maybe not quite.
We heard testimony from a witness about that the AG in Maryland had issued guidance about how they're doing enforcement of the data minimization standard in Maryland, and they were enforcing it more like the California standard. Do you know anything about that?
I don't, but I can get back to you. Are you saying that they have had some enforcements?
Well, somebody testified that they've done a guidance, that the AG has issued a guidance. Does anyone else remember that?
Yeah, I've been trying to Google it, and haven't been able to.
Yeah, but trying to find something to do a little research, so.
I can see if I can find.
There
that.
were, this witness was questioning the visibility, I think, of the. And that they were forcing more like California. But I didn't find that, I didn't look super hard, but I didn't find the guidance. Maybe if we looked up in my notes about who you see.
What other states around us have had a privacy laws?
Maine,
no, Maine isn't.
not.
New Hampshire.
Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Rhode Island.
My brain is focused on these.
Good buddy.
Yeah. Is there any particular
Thank you,
reason
Nick.
why we didn't do a comparison with New Hampshire and Maine or Rhode Island?
I wasn't asked to.
So my guess is those data privacies are probably less restrictive than Connecticut.
Yes.
Is that correct? So one of the concerns that have been having with this whole conversation is about pushing the Overton window. And it would be nice to see the comparison for those. One number, but for Maryland, which I know is stronger, and Connecticut is obviously stronger than what we passed in the Senate. And California, same thing. And of course, 2.3 is also stronger than what was passed in the Senate. And it would be nice to see that comparison, but as one person. Well, little,
New Hampshire, Rhode Island, basically Connecticut.
Basically the original starting point.
but we didn't even get, yeah, okay.
Except New Hampshire's 25,000.
So they are even lower.
You know, but they don't push you over with a sensitive data though, do they?
No, I mean, I would say like Connecticut, if businesses have even one piece of sensitive data and or personal data, they will have to comply with Connecticut starting July 1st. So yeah.
Mindful of Rick's time.
I have nothing else to do with it.
Don't say that.
But if we're doing some more comparisons, I think I have a fairly good idea of how 2.3 compares to the Senate passed bill, but sometimes it's hard for me to figure that out. It's whatever everybody wants.
Did you do a red line?
There's
The red line's on the record.
We have a
What's that?
red line of that.
There's a red line on the website. It's not, I didn't walk through the differences, but there's a literal highlight red line.
That's
on
right.
the- Yes,
Yeah,
that's the one.
that's fine.
But I understand it's not, without context, it could be hard. Because the bills are not aligned exactly, so sometimes
I can use that. Sometimes it's nice to get them grouped by themes, I guess, like you did.
right. If this were a 10-page bill, boy, how would I love to do that. This is not a 10-page bill. But I think, yeah, the question is, as someone that's passed by the Senate, you know, the difference between that and 2.3 are a lot. I mean, there are several differences.
But there's a lot to
But
say.
I will say 1.3, the walkthrough in May of last year.
Yeah.
Much different than even 2.3. 2.3 is closer to S71 as passed by the Senate. Not, again, they're not equal, but if you're comparing 1.3 to 2.3, 2.3 is closer to the original S71. So it's really what you all want to do. That's what it comes down to.
Soliciting opinions on this. I think it's pretty clear what I want. But, I mean, I don't mind sharing my thoughts.
But
I think we should be a little bit closer to the way that it was put out through the Senate. I understand that people are gonna say, you know, we'd rather have nothing, which I would contend that that's not. That to me, that just doesn't make good sense for policy. I think being outside of going beyond certainly what Connecticut has done, I feel, you know, we're such a small state. I don't know if that's a great idea. New Hampshire has, you know, the original Connecticut and apparently Rhode Island as well. I just think that being such a small state, we probably shouldn't be making it difficult. But that's just my opinion.
I'm not at that point yet.
And that's-
So in terms of making a choice, that's why I'm trying to get my head around, you know, I think that's why I think what Rick did this morning was really helpful. And I've read the Senate bill a lot, and tried to compare it. So I'm just trying to get in my head what the differences are. And then I'll make a decision.
And I'm not saying I'm, you know, ready to make a decision. I
Okay.
just think that I feel that we're doing committee conversation. I'm sorry. I feel like the push has been for a more restrictive bill. And that's my opinion. That's the way I feel. But I'm more than willing to have the conversation of meeting somewhere between, you know, the really restrictive and what we have in New Hampshire, New Jersey.
Sure.
And what was Connecticut.
And
I'm not into restrictive or broader or less restrictive. I'm into what's going to be effective. And given what we know about the practices.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm coming from, what's going to be effective. That's why I'm trying to get my head around, what the different models are.
I guess I'm pretty aligned with Rep Wooten. I'm uncomfortable with us doing anything novel. So, I'm definitely interested in learning and talking more, but my thinking right now is that the prudent direction is essentially the Connecticut, as passed the Senate with maybe some or all of the Connecticut updates. But I'm really concerned about unintended consequences of a very small state doing anything novel.
I have a clarifying question, because what you guys are saying are two very different things as far as Connecticut as passed, so the version that passed by the Senate versus Connecticut updated at 2025.
I think we consider the updates.
Yeah.
Right, which, looking at this and just really understanding, I would want more testimony and really understanding what are it hasn't gone into effect yet. And so I would want to understand what the potential intended and unintended consequences would be. But I don't know, from the beginning and the whole time, I'm just very concerned about us doing anything novel. And leading, Vermont can lead on a lot of issues. I just don't think this is one of them.
I think at the same time, we should be examining there's 18 or 20 other states out there right now that have privacy laws that we should be learning from their mistakes as well.
Yeah. Agreed. I just think we have to be careful.
Agreed.
So I'm very much with Abby. I like the way it looks on the Connecticut, the revised Connecticut bill. Of course, my big issue here has been about consent and about that choice. And we don't make tobacco products illegal because people are making bad decisions to smoke. If people want to sell their data to get a deal or whatever like that, I don't think it's our right to tell them they shouldn't. I think we need to tell them, hey, what you're doing, just like you do with tobacco, you say, hey, this is bad for you. But, if you want to do it, it's your life. But I also want to touch on what you had talked about. And I think that there needs to be some thresholds, different, I can see different tiers and take it as it is. But, there's the data that's necessary. And that, it's consent is kind of implied. If I buy a product, you need to take a credit card number. And then you have additional data that maybe isn't necessary, but might be useful for a better user experience. An example is Netflix. If I sign up on a new account with Netflix, well, you don't have to collect what types of movies I like. It's not necessary to provide the service, but it sure make my life easier. And then even perhaps a higher tier for what we would call sensitive data. Something that would be more than just a checkbox to opt in, but something that says, something a little more lengthy, like I consent to you using my sensitive data, something you actually have to type out, to get, because the one argument I do see in favor of what a lot of people are talking about, people being too busy and things like that, I think it's a valid point, because you get, especially you get all excited, you want to use this product or service, and you just want to push through. And you're not fully thinking things through. So I think, especially when you're dealing with sensitive data, having that extra layer of protection to say, hey, you're talking about personal sensitive data here. Are you sure you really want to do this? As far as the selling, I'm on the fence on that. I could go either way. I certainly don't have a problem with companies selling sensitive data as long as the consent is there. But I also see an argument for not doing that at all. And I could go either way there.
And I felt, so over the weekend, I was thinking kind of similar thoughts, in terms of the sort of normal regime and the way Connecticut used to be before these recent amendments. seems to me they had a data minimization kind of standard. I mean, that's not all that controversial. It's how you can, what are the exceptions? And the traditional exception is, well, you disclose to the consumer and they can opt out. And I'm in line with you in terms of there might be some data, call it sensitive, whatever that list is supposed to be, where you might want sort of the express, individualized or specific or whatever, opt-in kind of consent. And I think that's important for whatever, list we think is appropriate for the sensitive data, to have that level of protection. That's about it. I was thinking about, what you were saying last week, and that's where I ended up.
Yeah, and I agree with Monique. The data minimization standard needs to apply. It doesn't matter whether it's implied consent, or sensitive data. That data minimization should be a guiding principle.
And maybe there's some sense of, some of this stuff, I don't know. Even maybe there should be a ban. Some of that stuff. We'll keep that open.
If I can speak to sensitive data. So the draft 2.3 bans the sale of sensitive data, as does Maryland.
Yeah.
Connecticut does not consent. But if you look at Connecticut's processing of sensitive data, it's actually stricter than draft 2.3. So draft 2.3 talking about sensitive data, draft 2.3 says shall not, I guess I can share my screen, shall not collect or process sensitive data concerning the consumer, except when the processing is strictly necessary to provide or maintain a specific product or service requested by the consumer. So there's no consent piece there, right? You were talking about how maybe there should be consent to collect or process. Well, then you would actually want to make it stricter. So I'm just kind of saying we need to understand what we're doing here. And it's so this chart is helpful, but there's a lot going on. And I think the more we bring in California, Connecticut, Maryland, Rhode Island, whatever the states are, this is going to get confusing. And I just want the committee to be aware of, what are some things you really want? Like maybe ignore the other states for a second. And just what do you want? Like, what do you want Vermont to look like? And I hear that it's a small state, right? All these things, that's fine. But I think at some point, you got to think about just Vermont. So we're not getting confused with, well, Connecticut is like, because they're different. And I don't think it's necessarily the best lawmaking to just rely on other states. And then we're going to have a mix of states, and that's not great either. So I don't know. That's my pitch for do what you think is best, and then maybe not always compare it to other states because it's going to get confusing.
The science.
Hopefully it was helpful. I don't know. Maybe we'll.
I think that is helpful. That Overton window, where I feel it should be is between what passed the Senate and what Connecticut has in force. And then we talk about the stuff in between. That's my opinion.
I have a question, Michael. So why, just the rationale for starting behind the protections that Connecticut is offering, why would we start from a baseline of being less protective and also addressing, concern, like addressing things that maybe they fixed because they weren't quite working. Why would we start from a base that's less than where they are now?
Because I don't think we should, like Abby said, I don't think we should be leading on this. We're a small state, and I'm, like Rick said, Rhode Island and New Hampshire are more closely aligned to what Connecticut, which is S71 as passed by the Senate. And I do think it's important for businesses to feel comfortable with what we're doing, especially in light of every single time they talk about regulations. And this would be an additional regulation. to me, that's where I feel comfortable with, and I feel comfortable with my data in general. You know, we had the conversation about TikTok this morning. You know, I formatted my entire Galaxy tab just so that I could create a TikTok account because I don't want it mixing with my other stuff. You know, I know how to deal with that. And I just think that that's where I stand, I guess.
I guess I still didn't hear though, for if we're trying to match a bill that Connecticut passed a year ago, we wouldn't be leading, we'd be catching up. Why would that not be the base? Catching up to where they were a year ago versus.
But I'm not sure that I want to be where they are. That's.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering. Yeah,
Sorry.
and I guess, yeah.
I just, because just like, you know, I think of a clearer, more easier thing to think about is like raise the age, right? Like I am completely on the opposite side of a lot of people on that. And I think that this is kind of like that. I'm not with the higher protocols. That's all.
Even though our businesses will have to comply, like a lot of them, if they have even a single piece of like sensitive data that is defined in Connecticut, will have to comply with their law.
So this is why I'm talking about with that Overton window.
But I'm talking about 2025.
And I'm talking about on this side, you got 2025, and on this side, you got the Senate. Let's meet somewhere in the middle and have those conversations about which ones we want to pick from.
Even though the businesses have to be at the 2025 side.
Nope.
July 1st. What's up?
No, that's
I'm
not.
saying even
but
though,
that's
I'm
not.
asking why.
But that's not what I'm sorry, I'm not being clear, so.
I'm getting.
So what I'm saying is that we tailor our conversation within that, what I want our window to be, which is on this side, you've got the more restrictive Connecticut, and you've got this side, which is the S71 as passed by the Senate. I think we should tailor our conversations to pull from both to find out where we want to be within that window.
Yeah.
I think I mean, I'm okay with that framework for maybe a lot of reasons. I know you would prefer to have that 2020 version of Connecticut. I see a lot of the more recent provisions of Connecticut as being very helpful because I'm a little more leery than you are about data. But that in terms of a framework, I'm okay with that discussion because I could pull from, you know, the more recent ones to say, geez, that's a really good idea. And you might say, well, no, it's not a really good idea.
Right. It's meeting in that middle. And who knows, maybe through the conversation, we're like everything on 2025.
I'm sure I can persuade you of that.
No.
Just
Has Connecticut 2025 been in place long enough to have any real world history of implementation snafus or implementation history period or enforcement?
July 1st.
Goes into effect.
On July 1st.
Sorry.
Not if there's mentioning, they passed the bill in 2023 and they've already put some corrections from that.
Correct.
So we do have some data to
Twice.
work with.
2 years.
Correct. And to be fair, I don't think that anything that we put in place could go into effect that like July 2026, right? So anything that we choose to move forward is going to have an effective date farther down the road for businesses, for individuals, for everyone to get ready for that. So we will have time before it goes into effect to see what happens.
Strike that upon passage.
Early is July 1, 2026, so let's I'll circle that passage.
Closer to 18 to 24 months.
To Michael's point, I mean,
I feel like it doesn't make sense. If they put out a a brand of car last year, and they found out that it had a technical issue with it, and they said, this year we're going to update it. If you then said, well, I only want everybody to make cars like that previous edition, they've already identified errors that they wanted to update and fix. And so to me, 2025, they put in a thing, they found problems with it, they corrected it. And so I feel like that's, that should be a part of our foundational piece. I also feel like we need to make sure that that everything we do fits with what we have already done. All the rest of our, because we don't want to make laws that are going to contradict laws, and create more confusion. And when we talk about wanting to be similar, to have a cohesion, a regional cohesion, what we see is that Connecticut 2025 is how we start moving toward that cohesion, right? You can't say that, well, we'll just go back to all the other ones, because almost certainly all those other ones are going to start wanting they're going to start seeing the holes in the problem too. So I don't see us as being innovators moving forward, doing anything radical by just trying to keep up with the technology and keep up with the current learning. And so I don't see that's a problem. There are pieces of version 2.3 that I actually think, we talked about Vermont being its own special little place, and it's not quite like everything else. And so we don't want to, on the one hand, we don't want to be leaders too far ahead of the pack, but on the other hand, Vermont is a unique place. And so we need our legislation to reflect those unique features that we have. And so I feel like that there may be things from version 2.3 that specifically meet the needs of Vermonters. And when I hear people phrasing it, a more restrictive versus a less restrictive, I would like us to rephrase that as more protective, less protective, because I think that that's ultimately what we're trying to do. We're not actually trying to be restrictive. We're trying to be protective.
I agree. I mean, the other way to look at it, how can we build a privacy bill that is as effective as possible, protecting those, given a whole bunch of different considerations?
I think we're about as far as we can go today. Is there more information we need from Rick?
Bank account number, tracking number.
Whatever you need.
He needs more information.
Thanks. Can you read my mind, Rep Granny? Because that's, it's only May 5th. So, but I do kind of need to know where the committee wants to go with draft 3 point whatever, the next iteration. I hear the concerns, but I don't really have a direction as far as the major.
We have a few more people in here from tomorrow. I think tomorrow afternoon, and we have 2 members that aren't here right now. We need to really hone in on what road we want to go down there. So think about that tonight. Here's more testimony tomorrow, but then more afternoon, we get off the floor. If we have time, then start that discussion to give Rick a direction where we want to go. Okay. So tomorrow at 71, 9 to 10:20, and at 10:30, we're hearing from Department of Labor on the UI Trust Fund, our annual report on how the trust fund is doing, making sure that things are still going well. I have no reason to believe that they're not. I would think that if there was issues going on with the trust fund, we'd have heard about it long before this, but.
Multiple stakeholders.
So with that, any questions?
What are you doing first thing in the morning again? What's the first thing in the morning?
We're hearing, more testimony on that 70.
And so committee discussion starting at 1.
No,
No.
the floor starting it
When do we do committees?
after the 4. Yeah. Provided we have time.
Just need my schedule.
If not, then we're taking some testimony on Thursday. On page 648. That'll be at 9 to possibly 11. If we get done before that, we can continue the committee discussion as well. Okay. Very good. We can go offline.